Picture this 1983, and the world is buzzing with an unbelievable discovery. Fragments of an ancient manuscript surface, supposedly written by none other than Adolf Hitler himself. Historians scramble to authenticate it, journalists sensationalize the story, and the public is captivated. But here's the twist: it was all a masterful forgery, crafted by a notorious con artist who fooled experts and media alike. This wasn't just a simple trick, it was a hoax so convincing it slipped past the sharpest minds of the era. And believe it or not, this is just one of countless times history has been rewritten, not by truth but by deception. Welcome to a journey through the shadows of history, where lies wear the mask of fact and even the most skeptical among us can be duped. From fabricated relics to entire civilizations conjured from thin air, the past is littered with hoaxes that once held the world in their grip. Some were born from greed, others from sheer mischief, but every single one reveals something fascinating about human nature, our hunger for mystery, our willingness to believe, and the unsettling ease with which truth can be twisted. Today, we're uncovering 25 of the most astonishing historical hoaxes ever pulled off, stories so wild, you'll wonder how anyone fell for them. But here's the kicker: these weren't just fleeting scams. They shaped public opinion, swayed politics, and even redirected the course of scholarship. So buckle up, because by the end of this, you'll never look at history the same way again. Was that dinosaur skeleton in the museum really dug up, or was it someone's elaborate prank? Did that famous prophet actually exist, or was their entire life story fabricated? The answers might just leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. In the early 20th century, the scientific world was on the hunt for the ultimate prize, the missing link between apes and humans. Then, in 1912, an amateur archaeologist named Charles Dawson made a stunning announcement near the village of Piltdown in England. He claimed to have uncovered fragments of a skull, a jawbone, and primitive tools, all pointing to an ancient human ancestor. The so-called Piltdown Man was hailed as a groundbreaking discovery, bridging the gap in evolutionary theory. Experts marveled at the thick skull, which suggested advanced intelligence paired with an ape-like jaw, exactly what they expected from a transitional species. But something didn't add up. For decades, skeptics quietly raised questions. The jawbone's teeth showed unusual wear, and the bone itself didn't quite match the skull. Yet, it wasn't until 1953, over 40 years later, that modern scientific techniques finally exposed the truth. The Piltdown Man was a clever fraud. The skull fragments belonged to a medieval human, while the jaw was from an orangutan, deliberately filed down and stained to look ancient. Even the primitive tools were planted fakes. So who was behind it? The list of suspects is long, from Dawson himself to other ambitious figures of the time. Some theories even suggest the hoax was meant to embarrass the scientific community, exposing how easily experts could be misled by confirmation bias. And that's the real scandal, not just the forgery, but how eagerly it was embraced. The Piltdown Man fed into prevailing biases about human evolution, making it irresistible despite the red flags. It took decades for science to correct itself, proving that even the most respected minds can be fooled when they're convinced they've found exactly what they're looking for. This wasn't just a prank, it was a deception that derailed research for generations. Imagine how much further our understanding of human origins might have progressed if scientists hadn't wasted time chasing a phantom. The Piltdown hoax stands as a humbling lesson. In the search for truth, even the most convincing evidence deserves a second and third look. The Piltdown Man didn't just vanish when the truth came out, it left deep scars on the world of science. For decades, this fabricated fossil sent researchers down the wrong path, wasting time, money, and intellectual energy chasing a ghost. Think about it. While scientists were busy trying to fit Piltdown into the human family tree, legitimate discoveries were overlooked or dismissed because they didn't match the expected narrative. Fossils that could have rewritten our understanding of evolution sooner were sidelined, all because the scientific community had been spoon-fed a lie they were desperate to believe. The damage went beyond wasted effort, it shattered trust. When the hoax was finally exposed, it wasn't just Charles Dawson or a handful of experts who looked foolish. The entire field of paleontology took a hit. Skepticism toward new discoveries grew, and every fossil unearthed afterward was met with heightened scrutiny, sometimes to a fault. Legitimate findings faced extra hurdles, as if the shadow of Piltdown made scientists afraid to be fooled again. This collective hesitation slowed progress, creating a climate where groundbreaking truths had to fight twice as hard for acceptance. And then there were the careers caught in the crossfire. Prominent researchers who'd staked their reputations on Piltdown's authenticity saw their legacies tarnished overnight. Some never recovered. The scandal became a cautionary tale about the dangers of confirmation bias, the human tendency to embrace evidence that fits our preconceptions while ignoring what doesn't. Piltdown Man was the perfect trap because it told scientists exactly what they wanted to hear. That human evolution began with a big brain, followed by other changes. It flattered their assumptions, and that made the lie irresistible. Even today, the ghost of Piltdown lingers. It's cited in ethics lectures, forensic anthropology courses, and debates about scientific rigor. The hoax didn't just mislead, it rewrote the rules of how evidence is examined. Modern authentication methods, from chemical testing to microscopic analysis, owe their rigor in part to the embarrassment Piltdown caused. Every time a new fossil is announced, you can bet someone somewhere mutters, "Let's not have another Piltdown." But here's the twist: while the hoax was a disaster, it also forced science to grow up. The fallibility it exposed led to better safeguards, more humility, and a healthier dose of skepticism in research. In a strange way, Piltdown Man's greatest legacy isn't the lie itself. It's the relentless pursuit of truth that its exposure inspired. The next time you hear about a revolutionary discovery, remember, sometimes the biggest lessons come from the boldest deceptions. While scientists were still reeling from the Piltdown scandal, another outrageous hoax was already taking root across the Atlantic, one that played not on academic ambition, but on America's growing fascination with the bizarre. In 1869, workers digging a well behind a barn in Cardiff, New York, struck something impossibly strange. A 10-foot-tall petrified man, his face frozen in an eternal grimace, his skin seemingly turned to stone. Word spread like wildfire. Crowds flocked to see the so-called Cardiff Giant, paying 50 cents, a small fortune at the time, for just a glimpse. Newspapers declared it a biblical relic, possibly one of the ancient giants mentioned in the Book of Genesis. Even respected scholars weighed in, convinced this was a genuine prehistoric wonder, but the truth was far stranger than fiction. The giant wasn't a fossil, it was a prank gone spectacularly right. The brainchild of a cigar salesman named George Hull, the whole scheme began as a private joke. Hull, an avowed atheist, wanted to poke fun at fundamentalist preachers who took every word of the Bible literally. So he commissioned a block of gypsum from Iowa, shipped it to Chicago, and hired stonecutters to carve it into a grotesque human figure. They aged it with sulfuric acid, hammered pores into its skin to mimic texture, and even buried it behind his cousin's barn to gather authentic dirt stains. Hull's plan was simple: let locals discover it, then sit back and laugh as religious crowds fell for his stunt. What he didn't expect was how fiercely America would embrace the lie. Within weeks, the Cardiff Giant became a national obsession. Promoters like P.T. Barnum smelled profit, offering fortunes to exhibit it. When Hull refused, Barnum simply made a plaster copy and claimed his was the real giant, leaving the public baffled over which to believe. Scientists, meanwhile, were split. Some geologists immediately spotted the carving marks, but others, desperate to believe, insisted it was a genuine artifact. Yale paleontologist Othniel Marsh famously dismissed it as a very decided humbug, But even his credibility couldn't stop the frenzy. People wanted the giant to be real. And that's the real magic of this hoax. Unlike Piltdown, which targeted experts, the Cardiff Giant preyed on something far more universal: our love of spectacle. It didn't matter that the figure's elbows were anatomically impossible or that gypsum doesn't petrify flesh. The giant was a story people could touch, a physical manifestation of their wildest myths. By the time Hull finally confessed, admitting he'd spent $2,600 just to see how far I could stuff nonsense down the public throat, it was too late. The giant had already earned him tens of thousands in exhibition fees, proving that sometimes the most outrageous lies are the ones we're happiest to believe. The legacy, a perfect snapshot of post-Civil War America, a nation hungry for wonder, willing to suspend disbelief for a good story, and utterly unconcerned with being fooled. Today, the Cardiff Giant sits in a small museum in Cooperstown, still grinning as if in on the joke, because in the end, the hoax wasn't really about religion or science. It was about us and how eagerly we'll pay to be amazed. The Cardiff Giant didn't just fade into obscurity after the truth came out, it became something bigger. It wormed its way into the fabric of American culture, turning from a humiliating prank into a symbol of the era's hunger for spectacle. Newspapers couldn't get enough of the story, spinning it into moral lessons about gullibility, while showmen like P. T. Barnum saw dollar signs. The giant's runaway success proved something startling. People didn't just tolerate being fooled, they enjoyed it, and that revelation sparked a whole new industry of hoaxes, each one more outlandish than the last. Take the Fiji mermaid, for example. Just a few years before the Cardiff Giant, Barnum had exhibited a grotesque taxidermy hybrid, half monkey, half fish, claiming it was a real mermaid. But after the giant's fame, these sideshow attractions took on a life of their own. Audiences flocked to see them, not because they believed, but because the thrill of the lie was part of the fun. The giant had blurred the line between deception and entertainment, paving the way for everything from staged seances to circus oddities. It wasn't just about tricking people anymore, it was about giving them a story they wanted to be part of, even if they knew it wasn't true. And then there's the irony of its museum career. Today, the Cardiff Giant sits in the Farmers Museum in Cooperstown, New York, no longer a scientific curiosity but a cultural artifact. Plaques beside it don't just describe its dimensions, they recount the hoax in detail, turning it into a teachable moment. Schools bring students to see it, not to marvel at its realism, but to discuss how easily myths can take root. Museums that once displayed it as a fossil now use it to warn against blind faith in authority. The giant's greatest trick wasn't fooling the public, it was outliving its own lie to become a permanent fixture in the history of human credulity. Even modern hoaxes owe it a debt. From crop circles to viral internet myths, the formula remains the same. Present something just plausible enough to spark debate, then sit back as the public does the rest. The giant proved that the best cons aren't about airtight deception, they're about giving people permission to play along. And in that sense, George Hull's prank wasn't just a product of its time. It was a blueprint for every tall tale, every exaggerated headline, and every too-good-to-check story that's followed. So the next time you scroll past a headline that makes you pause, ancient alien city found beneath Antarctica, remember the Cardiff Giant. It's not that we've gotten any better at spotting lies, it's that we've never really stopped loving them. The giant's grin isn't just a carving, it's the smirk of a joke that's still on us centuries later. By 1917, the world was desperate for magic. The horrors of World War I had left millions yearning for innocence and wonder, and two young girls in the English village of Cottingley seemed to deliver exactly that. When 16-year-old Elsie Wright and her 9-year-old cousin Frances Griffiths claimed to have photographed fairies at the bottom of their garden, even the most hardened skeptics hesitated. The black and white images showed the girls smiling as delicate, winged creatures fluttered beside them, their gauzy skirts shimmering like morning dew. It was the kind of whimsy a war-torn public ached to believe in. But the real shock came when Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes and a devoted spiritualist, championed the photos as irrefutable proof of the supernatural. The pictures spread like wildfire. Doyle, grieving the loss of his son in the war, saw them as validation of his belief in an unseen world. He published an article in the Strand magazine declaring the fairies real, and suddenly, the Cottingley photographs weren't just a childhood fantasy, they were a global phenomenon. Experts scrutinized the images, debating the play of light and shadow, while the public devoured every detail. Critics pointed out oddities. The fairies' hairstyles looked suspiciously modern, their poses too static, but Doyle dismissed them, insisting children couldn't possibly orchestrate such an elaborate hoax. He was wrong. Decades later, in the 1980s, Elsie and Francis finally confessed. The fairies weren't spirits or figments of imagination. They were paper cutouts painstakingly sketched by Elsie, then pinned to the ground with hatpins. The girls had used Elsie's father's camera, borrowing his mid-plate glass negatives to stage their scenes. Their motivation, simple mischief. Francis, tired of being scolded for coming home wet after playing near the beck, had invented the fairies as an excuse. Elsie, an artist, saw an opportunity to bring the story to life. Neither expected their prank to spiral into an international debate. What makes this hoax unforgettable isn't just the deception, it's what it reveals about the era's longing for enchantment. In a time of unimaginable loss, people clung to the idea of fairies as fiercely as Doyle did. The photos became a Rorschach test. Spiritualists saw proof of the afterlife, scientists saw fraud, and the public saw hope. Even after the confession, some refused to accept the truth. Frances maintained until her death that at least one photo showed real fairies, a tantalizing hint that maybe, just maybe, magic had touched Cottingley after all. The legacy of the Cottingley Fairies lingers in our obsession with blurring reality and fantasy. Today, the photos are celebrated not as evidence but as cultural artifacts, a testament to how desperately we want to believe in the impossible. And perhaps that's the real magic, not the paper fairies, but the fact that, for a brief moment, they let the world dream. The Cottingley Fairy photos didn't emerge in a vacuum. They were a single spark in a roaring fire of supernatural obsession. The early 20th century was drowning in spiritualism, a movement that promised contact with the dead, proof of the afterlife, and glimpses into unseen worlds. Seances became dinner party entertainment, mediums turned into celebrities, and even scientists dabbled in ghost hunting. It was an era where grief from war, from disease, from rapid industrialization drove people to clutch at any thread of magic. And into this fever dream walked two girls with cardboard cutouts and a camera. What made their hoax so potent was timing. World War I had left millions mourning, and spiritualism offered comfort by suggesting lost loved ones weren't truly gone. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wasn't just a famous author, he was a grieving father, and his public endorsement of the fairies gave them legitimacy, but he wasn't alone. Respected figures like physicist Oliver Lodge and biologist Alfred Russel Wallace openly supported spiritualist claims, blurring the line between science and superstition. When experts hesitated to dismiss the photos outright, it wasn't just about the images, it was about the cultural moment. People wanted to believe in something beyond the trenches and tombstones. The Cottingley Fairies became a Rorschach test for the era's anxieties. Spiritualists saw them as nature spirits, proof of a mystic realm coexisting with ours. Theosophists who believed in hidden masters guiding humanity cited them as evidence of higher planes. Even skeptics found themselves caught in the paradox. The photos felt too crude to be real, yet too earnest to be frauds. That tension between doubt and desire was the hoax's secret weapon. It didn't need to convince everyone, it just needed to leave room for wonder and the girls. They became accidental icons. Elsie and Francis never expected their prank to spiral into a global debate, but they played their roles perfectly. When pressed, they gave just enough detail to tantalize, describing the fairies' misty forms or the way they vanished if strangers came near. It was the golden rule of grift: let the audience convince themselves. By the time skeptics like illusionist Harry Houdini demanded proof, the myth had already outstripped the facts. The craze left a lasting mark. Modern paranormal investigations, from ghost hunting TV shows to ufology, owe their DNA to this era's blend of science and spectacle. The Cottingley Fairies didn't just fool people, they revealed how thin the line is between skepticism and faith, especially when hearts are on the line. Today, those photos are cultural relics, but their real legacy is this: sometimes the most powerful hoaxes aren't about what they fake, but what they expose about us. Imagine a world where machines could outthink humans long before computers even existed. That was the promise of the Turk, a life-sized mechanical man dressed in Ottoman robes, seated behind a wooden cabinet with a chessboard on top. Built in 1770 by Wolfgang von Kempelen, this automaton stunned Europe by defeating some of the greatest minds of the age, from Napoleon Bonaparte to Benjamin Franklin. Crowds gasped as its wooden hand moved pieces with eerie precision, its gears whirring theatrically between moves. But the real magic wasn't engineering, it was pure illusion. The Turk's secret was simple yet brilliantly concealed. A human chess master hidden inside the cabinet controlled every move. Kempelen, a Hungarian inventor, designed the machine with sliding panels and a rotating seat to allow his hidden operator to shift out of sight during public inspections. Audiences were shown the cabinet's intricate clockwork mechanisms, which rattled convincingly, but they were just decoys. The real genius was in the misdirection. As the automaton's arm moved, the hidden player followed the game through a system of magnets beneath the board, maneuvering pieces with levers so smooth, even skeptics struggled to spot the trick. What made the Turk so mesmerizing wasn't just the deception, but who it fooled. Napoleon, known for his strategic brilliance, played the machine in 1809 during the height of his power and lost. Eyewitnesses claimed the emperor, either frustrated or amused, deliberately made illegal moves to test the automaton. The Turk responded by sweeping the pieces off the board, a flourish that only deepened its mystique. Benjamin Franklin, himself a keen chess player, was equally captivated during his time as U.S. ambassador to France. Even Edgar Allan Poe later wrote an essay dissecting the hoax, though he wrongly guessed it used a mechanical arm controlled by wires. The Turk's legacy outlived its creators. After Kempelen's death, it passed through several owners, each adding new layers to its myth. At one point, it was even billed as a thinking machine capable of language and music, further blurring the line between science and spectacle. But the truth, when finally exposed, didn't diminish its fame. It elevated the Turk into something greater. This wasn't just a parlor trick, it was a mirror held up to human nature. In an age of enlightenment, when reason was prized above all, the Turk revealed how eagerly even the sharpest minds would surrender to wonder. By the time the machine was destroyed in a fire in 1854, it had already cemented its place in history. Today, we'd call it an early example of artificial intelligence hype, a reminder that our fascination with machines that think is as old as technology itself. The Turk didn't just play chess, it played on something far deeper, our timeless desire to believe in the impossible, and in that, it was always one move ahead. The Turk didn't just vanish after its final chess match, it became a blueprint for centuries of technological mythmaking. Long before the term robot entered our vocabulary, this mechanical marvel shaped how society imagined artificial intelligence. Inventors and writers alike couldn't resist its allure, borrowing its mystique to fuel both real innovations and fantastical stories. Take the early 19th century when automata were all the rage. Devices like the silver swan or the digesting duck dazzled crowds, but none captured the imagination like the Turk. Its legacy wasn't just in the gears and levers, it was in the idea that machines could mimic human thought, planting seeds for everything from Charles Babbage's analytical engine to modern AI. Literature, too, fell under its spell. Edgar Allan Poe wasn't the only writer obsessed with the Turk. The automaton appeared in poems, novels, and essays, often as a symbol of humanity's uneasy relationship with technology. In E.T. A. Hoffman's 19th-century stories, clockwork beings grappled with identity, echoing the Turk's uncanny blend of man and machine. Even Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, published just years after the Turk toured Europe, carries whispers of its influence. Both tales wrestle with the consequences of creating life-like intelligence. Fast forward to the 20th century, and the Turk's spirit resurfaces in Isaac Asimov's robot stories, where machines follow strict ethical codes, much like the hidden operator guiding the automaton's every move. Hollywood couldn't resist either. Silent films like The Chess Player 1927 directly adapted the Turk's story, while more modern nods appear in movies like Hugo and The Prestige. Each retelling plays with the same themes: deception, wonder, and the blurred line between genius and trickery. The Turk's greatest trick wasn't fooling chess masters, it was embedding itself in our collective psyche, becoming shorthand for the tension between human ingenuity and the machines we create. And let's not forget its darker legacy. The Turk's success relied on concealing a human inside a metaphor ripe for exploitation. In factories and workshops, early industrialists used automata to awe workers, hinting that machines might one day replace them. The same sleight of hand that made the Turk enchanting also masked the grueling labor behind industrialization. Today, as we debate AI ethics and algorithmic bias, we're still grappling with questions the Turk first posed: who's really pulling the strings, and what happens when we mistake the illusion for reality? So the next time you hear about a robot writing poetry or a chatbot passing for human, remember the wooden automaton from 1770. Its influence stretches far beyond chess. It's the original ghost in the machine, reminding us that every technological marvel comes with a hidden human cost. And that's a lesson we're still learning, move by move. In the 8th century, a document surfaced that would alter the course of European history: the donation of Constantine. Purportedly written by Emperor Constantine the Great in the 4th century, it granted the Pope sweeping political authority over Rome and the entire Western Roman Empire. For centuries, this text was the ultimate trump card in the Vatican's arsenal, wielded to justify papal supremacy over kings and emperors alike. Monarchs bowed to its authority, lands were claimed in its name, and wars were fought under its banner. But here's the kicker: it was all a masterful forgery, crafted not in Constantine's time, but 400 years later by someone with a very specific agenda. The document's contents were as audacious as they were convenient. It claimed that Constantine, grateful to Pope Sylvester I for miraculously curing his leprosy, had voluntarily handed over control of Rome and the western provinces to the papacy. Even more staggering, it declared that the Pope held authority above all the churches in the whole world, effectively making him the supreme ruler of Christendom. For the medieval church, this was a goldmine. Suddenly, any challenge to papal power could be dismissed as sacrilege. After all, who dared argue with an edict from Constantine himself? Popes used it to settle disputes, seize territories, and even depose unruly monarchs. The Holy Roman Emperor Charlemagne's coronation in 800 was justified through its lens, and later it became a cornerstone of the investiture controversy, where popes and kings clashed over who had the right to appoint bishops. But cracks in the story began to show long before the Renaissance. Critics noticed oddities like the document's Latin, which didn't match 4th century style but echoed 8th century phrasing. The timeline was suspicious too. Historical records showed Constantine was baptized on his deathbed by an Arian bishop, not Sylvester, and the leprosy cure was pure legend. Yet for centuries, pointing out these flaws was career suicide. The church's grip on power depended on the donation's legitimacy, so dissenters were silenced, often forcefully. Then came Lorenzo Valla, a 15th-century scholar with a razor-sharp mind and a taste for controversy. In 1440, he published a blistering takedown, dismantling the donation word by word. Using linguistic analysis, a revolutionary approach for his time, he proved the document's Latin was riddled with medieval anachronisms. He even mocked its grandiose claims, asking why Constantine would surrender his empire to a religious leader when no Roman emperor had ever done such a thing. Valla's work was explosive, but it wasn't just about exposing a lie. It marked a turning point in European thought, showcasing the power of critical inquiry over blind faith. The Renaissance, with its hunger for truth and revival of classical learning, had found its smoking gun. The fallout was monumental. Once the donations' fraud was laid bare, the Church's political authority began to crumble, fueling the Protestant Reformation and the secular upheavals that followed. Yet the hoax's legacy isn't just one of deception. It's a case study in how a single lie, skillfully crafted and fiercely defended, can shape civilizations. Without the donation of Constantine, the medieval map of power might have looked utterly different. And that's the real lesson here. Sometimes the most dangerous hoaxes aren't the ones that fool individuals, but the ones that rewrite the world. Once exposed, the donation of Constantine didn't just fade into obscurity, it became kindling for a revolution. Lorenzo Valla's meticulous takedown in 1440 didn't merely prove the document was fake, it handed reformers a weapon to challenge the very foundations of papal authority. By the time Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in 1517, critics of the Catholic Church were already wielding Valla's findings like a battering ram. Luther himself cited the forgery in his writings, arguing that if the Vatican could lie about something so monumental, what else had they fabricated? The donation became exhibit A in the case against church corruption, fueling the fire of the Protestant Reformation. But the hoax's fallout wasn't limited to theology. Its exposure marked a seismic shift in how history was studied. Before Valla, documents were often taken at face value if they carried the weight of tradition. After his analysis, scholars began treating ancient texts with new skepticism, comparing language, cross-referencing dates, and dissecting authorship methods that laid the groundwork for modern historical criticism. Suddenly, every cherished manuscript was suspect. The Renaissance, already a rebirth of classical learning, now became a battleground for truth, where humanist scholars like Erasmus joined Valla in demanding evidence over blind faith. Even politics felt the tremor. Kings who'd once bowed to papal decrees now questioned Rome's authority, realizing the Church's claims to temporal power rested on shaky ground. The donation had been the keystone holding up an entire arch of medieval legitimacy. Remove it, and the structure wobbled. By the time the Peace of Westphalia ended Europe's religious wars in 1648, the world had fundamentally changed. The Vatican's grip on secular power was broken, nation-states were rising, and history itself had become a discipline rooted in proof, not myth. Yet the most ironic twist. The forgery meant to cement papal supremacy ultimately did the opposite. In trying to eternalize its authority, the Church inadvertently exposed the vulnerabilities of relying on lies. The donation's legacy isn't just a cautionary tale about deception. It's a testament to how one lie, unraveled, can rewrite the course of civilization. And that's the real power of a great hoax. It doesn't just fool people, it forces them to see the world differently once the truth comes out. In 1995, the world was hit by a grainy black and white film that sent shockwaves through the UFO community. Purportedly leaked from a top-secret government archive, the footage showed medical professionals in hazmat suits performing an autopsy on a bizarre, humanoid figure with an oversized head and elongated limbs, supposedly an alien recovered from the infamous Roswell crash of 1947. The film, labeled simply The Alien Autopsy, became an overnight sensation, airing on major networks and fueling endless speculation. Was this finally the smoking gun proving extraterrestrial life? Or was it just another elaborate hoax playing on humanity's fascination with the unknown? The footage itself was riddled with eerie details. The creature's black eyes stared blankly at the ceiling as gloved hands probed its rubbery skin. Strange organs, unlike anything found in human anatomy, were removed and placed in metal trays. The film's shaky, high-contrast quality lent it an air of authenticity, mimicking the style of mid-century military documentation. Even the setting, a sterile room with outdated equipment, seemed meticulously crafted to match the era. UFOlogists dissected every frame, pointing to the creature's 6 fingers and lack of visible genitalia as proof of its otherworldly origins. News outlets treated it as a potential bombshell, with experts debating whether the film could be genuine, while skeptics raised red flags about inconsistencies in the lighting and camera angles. Then came the confession. 8 years later, in 2003, a British filmmaker named Ray Santilli stepped forward with a shocking admission. The film was a reconstruction. Not entirely fake, he claimed, but a recreation based on authentic footage he'd once seen that had supposedly deteriorated beyond repair. According to Santilli, he'd hired special effects artists to rebuild the scene from memory, using latex models and animal offal for the aliens' innards. The original film, he insisted, had been real, but this version was a best guess meant to preserve history. The public reaction was mixed. Some saw his explanation as a desperate cover-up, others accepted it as proof the whole thing was staged. But the deeper question remained: why had so many been so eager to believe? The answer lies in Roswell's shadow. Since the alleged UFO crash in 1947, the military's shifting explanations, first calling it a flying disc, then a weather balloon, had sown seeds of mistrust. By the 90s, conspiracy theories about recovered alien bodies were already entrenched in pop culture. The autopsy film didn't need to be flawless, it just had to fit the narrative. And the timing couldn't have been better. The mid-90s were a golden age for UFO mania, with shows like The X-Files feeding public appetite for government cover-ups. The film's murky origins and technical imperfections only added to its mystique, making it feel like something they didn't want us to see. Santilli's hoax, whether intended as art or deception, revealed something profound about human psychology. We don't just believe in aliens, we want to believe. The film's enduring cult status, with die-hard supporters still arguing for its authenticity, proves how powerful a well-timed myth can be. Today, it's studied less as evidence of extraterrestrials and more as a case study in media manipulation. Because in the end, the real mystery wasn't the creature on the table, it was our collective willingness to play along. The Roswell incident didn't just spawn one hoax, it birthed an entire industry. What began as a fleeting news report about a flying disc crash in 1947, New Mexico snowballed into a cultural phenomenon, fueling everything from best-selling books to blockbuster films. But the real story isn't about whether aliens landed in the desert. It's about how a single, murky event became the cornerstone of a multi-million-dollar conspiracy machine. Take the eyewitness accounts, for example. Decades after the crash, dozens of people suddenly came forward with astonishing claims. Wreckage that wasn't of this earth, military cover-ups, even secret hangars storing alien bodies. Many were later debunked, like the infamous Alien Autopsy footage, but by then the myth had taken root. Books like The Roswell Incident 1980 packaged these stories into a compelling narrative, blending half-truths with speculative leaps. Authors didn't just report the rumors, they amplified them, turning hearsay into gospel for a growing audience of believers. Then came the commercialization. Roswell transformed from a sleepy town into a UFO mecca, complete with alien-themed streetlights, an annual UFO festival, and a museum dedicated to the truth. Local businesses thrived selling T-shirts, bobbleheads, and even alien-shaped waffles. The irony: this explosion of merchandise wasn't driven by hard evidence, it was powered by the very ambiguity that made the hoax so enduring. The less the government clarified, the more room there was for imagination, and imagination, as it turns out, sells. Hollywood seized the opportunity. From the X-Files to Independence Day, Roswell became shorthand for government secrecy and extraterrestrial encounters. These portrayals didn't just reflect public fascination, they shaped it, reinforcing the idea that where there's smoke, there's fire. Even the Pentagon's eventual release of reports explaining the debris as a crashed spy balloon did little to dampen enthusiasm. For true believers, every denial was just another layer of the cover-up. The most fascinating twist: Roswell's legacy isn't just about aliens. It's a blueprint for how modern conspiracy theories work, blending genuine skepticism of authority with a hunger for sensational stories. In an age of deepfakes and viral misinformation, the Roswell playbook feels eerily familiar. Take a kernel of truth, spin it into something extraordinary, and let the public's skepticism of power do the rest. The crash site may be empty, but the myth it spawned shows no signs of fading. After all, in a world hungry for mysteries, some secrets are too profitable to solve. The year was 1983, and Stern magazine had just pulled off the journalistic coup of the century, or so they thought. After months of secret negotiations, the German publication proudly announced it had acquired 62 handwritten volumes purporting to be the personal diaries of Adolf Hitler. The implications were staggering. Here, finally, might be the Führer's unfiltered thoughts on everything from the invasion of Poland to his final days in the bunker. Stern's editors could barely contain their excitement, paying nearly 10 million Deutschmarks, roughly $4.5 million today, for the trove. Major media outlets scrambled to secure serialization rights, with the Times of London and Newsweek shelling out fortunes to publish excerpts. The world held its breath, waiting for history to be rewritten by the dictator's own hand. But almost immediately, something felt off. Historians noted glaring inaccuracies, entries describing events Hitler couldn't have witnessed or referencing people he'd never met. The handwriting, while superficially similar, lacked the erratic pressure and angular strokes characteristic of Hitler's script. Most damning, the diary's provenance traced back to a shadowy dealer named Konrad Kujau, a known forger with a rap sheet that included counterfeit Nazi memorabilia. When pressed, Kujau spun an elaborate tale of the diaries being smuggled out of East Germany in a hay truck, hidden for decades by loyal SS officers. It was the kind of story that sounded just plausible enough to tempt believers, and just outlandish enough to raise eyebrows. The house of cards collapsed within weeks. Forensic analysis revealed the diaries were modern fakes, written on post-war paper using ink that hadn't existed in Hitler's lifetime. Even the binding glue was chemically dated to the 1960s. Kujau, it turned out, had spent years painstakingly copying Hitler's speeches into blank notebooks, then aging them with tea stains and clever handling. His motivation, pure profit. The scandal exploded, humiliating Stern and its partners, while Kujau, ever the showman, later served prison time but parlayed his notoriety into a career as a celebrity forger, even autographing fake Hitler diaries for fans. What makes this hoax unforgettable isn't just the audacity of the forgery, but the desperation of those who fell for it. In the rush for a headline-making scoop, Stern bypassed basic due diligence, ignoring experts who'd flagged red flags from the start. The Hitler Diaries tapped into a morbid curiosity about history's monsters, a hunger to understand evil that overrode skepticism. And that's the real lesson here. Even the most rigorous institutions can be duped when the prize seems worth the risk. Today, the diaries sit in a German archive, a cautionary tale about the price of believing too eagerly and the enduring allure of the lies we want to be true. The Hitler Diaries scandal wasn't just a failure of authentication, it was a case study in media frenzy at its most reckless. Stern magazine, blinded by the potential exclusivity, ignored glaring inconsistencies in their desperation to break the story first. Historians like Hugh Trevor Roper, initially hired to verify the diaries, later admitted they'd been pressured to approve them prematurely. The parallels to today's fake news cycle are unnerving. A sensational claim, a race to publish, and a trail of embarrassed experts left picking up the pieces once the truth comes out. What makes this so explosive isn't the forgery itself, but how eagerly it was embraced. Major outlets like Newsweek and The Times didn't just report the diaries. They staked their reputations on them, paying fortunes for serialization rights before ink tests were even run. Sound familiar? It's the same reckless speed we see today, where viral stories spread faster than facts can catch up. The diaries became a mirror for journalism's worst instincts, the temptation to prioritize scoops over scrutiny, clicks over credibility. And the fallout was brutal. Stern's reputation never fully recovered. Trevor Roper, once a towering figure in historical scholarship, saw his legacy tarnished overnight. Yet the deeper damage was to public trust. If respected institutions could be duped so easily, what else might they get wrong? That erosion of faith didn't end with the 1980s. It paved the way for today's skepticism, where mainstream media is often dismissed as unreliable before the first fact is checked. The diaries also exposed a darker truth. Some lies are too lucrative to resist. Just as modern algorithms reward outrage and spectacle, Stern knew Hitler's name would sell. They weren't betting on the diaries being real, they were betting on the world wanting them to be real. It's a playbook we've seen repeated, from fabricated viral tweets to doctored war photos. The lesson isn't just about forgers, it's about the systems that reward them. Fast forward to today, and the diaries feel eerily prophetic. The rush to publish hasn't slowed, it's accelerated, with social media amplifying unverified claims at lightning speed. But here's the twist. While Konrad Kujau needed months to craft his forgeries, today's hoaxes can be generated in minutes with AI. The tools have changed, but the human weakness they exploit remains the same. We still crave the story that confirms our biases, the bombshell that feels too big to ignore. So next time you see a headline that seems too explosive to be true, remember the Hitler Diaries. Not just as a cautionary tale, but as proof that the line between news and narrative has always been thinner than we'd like to admit. The real hoax isn't the lie itself, it's the illusion that we're immune to falling for it. One evening in 1917, journalist H.L. Mencken sat down at his typewriter with mischief in mind. Known for his razor-sharp wit, he crafted a tongue-in-cheek article for the New York Evening Mail titled "A Neglected Anniversary," detailing the absurd history of the bathtub in America. With a straight face, he spun a tale about the first bathtub being installed in Cincinnati in 1842, a scandalous event that supposedly sparked outrage, led to city ordinances banning bathing in winter, and required presidential intervention to make tubs socially acceptable. It was pure satire, mocking the public's tendency to sensationalize mundane innovations. But within weeks, something extraordinary happened. People started believing every word. The article spread like wildfire, reprinted in newspapers nationwide without a hint of irony. Soon, Mencken's fictional bathtub timeline appeared in earnest academic journals, medical textbooks, and even congressional records. Mayors proudly cited Cincinnati's historic tub in speeches, while health reformers used the fake backlash as a cautionary tale against resistance to progress. The sheer audacity of the lie made it irresistible. After all, who would invent bathtub history? Mencken watched in equal parts horror and amusement as his joke took on a life of its own. Decades later, he admitted the hoax in a 1926 essay, confessing, "It had no more truth in it than a campaign speech." Yet even after his confession, the myth persisted, popping up in reputable sources as late as the 1950s. What makes this hoax so fascinating isn't just its longevity, but how perfectly it exploited human nature. Mencken understood that people crave origin stories, especially ones that paint the past as foolish compared to the enlightened present. His fake bathtub drama ticked all the boxes: moral panic, government overreach, and eventual triumph of common sense. The tale was just plausible enough to pass muster, blending real details. Cincinnati did have early plumbing advancements with outrageous fabrications. And once the story entered the ecosystem of common knowledge, it became self-sustaining. Writers citing it didn't fact-check, they assumed someone else already had. The Bathtub Hoax also reveals how satire can backfire spectacularly. Mencken, a staunch critic of propaganda, inadvertently proved how easily falsehoods take root when wrapped in the veneer of authority. His own reputation as a respected journalist lent the piece credibility it never deserved. Sound familiar? It's the same dynamic we see today with viral misinformation. Once a claim gets enough shares, its origins hardly matter. The bathtub myth outlived its creator because, like all great hoaxes, it told people something they wanted to believe. That progress is always hard-won, and that we're smarter than those who came before us. Even now, echoes of Mencken's prank linger. Historians still stumble upon references to Cincinnati's infamous bathtub ban in obscure texts, a testament to how stubbornly fiction can masquerade as fact. The real lesson here isn't about bathing habits, it's about the fragility of truth in a world where a good story often trumps a dull reality. So the next time you hear an oddly perfect historical anecdote, ask yourself, could this be someone's century-old joke still ticking away in the collective imagination? After all, if a fake bathtub can fool generations, what else might we be soaking in? Mencken's bathtub hoax might have been conceived as satire, but its unintended consequences reveal a dangerous gray area in journalism where humor and deception collide. On one hand, his article was meant to lampoon the public's tendency to mythologize the mundane, a classic example of satire holding a mirror to societal absurdity. But when that mirror is mistaken for a window, the joke stops being funny and starts becoming misinformation. This ethical tightrope isn't just a relic of the past. From The Onion headlines taken as fact to parody social media accounts sparking panic, the line between clever commentary and harmful deception has never been blurrier. Take the case of Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal, published in 1729. His suggestion that the Irish poor should sell their children as food was so grotesque that he assumed no one would miss the irony. Yet some readers, detached from Swift's biting critique of British policy, genuinely believed he endorsed cannibalism. Fast forward to 2015, when a New Yorker satirical piece about a historian who fabricated ancient sources went viral, with academics earnestly citing it as evidence of scholarly fraud. The pattern is clear: satire depends on shared context, but in an age of fragmented media consumption, that context often gets lost in translation. The stakes are higher now. A 2018 Babylon Bee article claiming a California school district banned the national anthem was shared by a sitting U.S. congressman as evidence of liberal insanity. When satire enters the political arena, it can weaponize misinformation, fueling divisions under the guise of humor. Comedians argue their role is to provoke, not educate, but when provocation spills into real-world consequences, who bears responsibility? After a parody news site's fake headline about a corporate bankruptcy triggered a temporary stock dip in 2013, even free speech advocates questioned where the line should be drawn. Yet silencing satire isn't the answer. Its power lies in exposing truths that straight reporting can't, like the Colbert Report's deadpan takedown of media bias. The challenge is cultivating a public literate enough to spot the joke. Finland's national curriculum now includes media literacy programs teaching students to dissect satire, while platforms like Facebook have begun labeling parody content. But perhaps the real lesson comes from Mencken himself, who once grumbled that no one ever went broke underestimating the intelligence of the American public. In the end, the bathtub hoax endures not because people are gullible, but because we're wired to prefer compelling narratives over tedious truths, a flaw satirists exploit and one the rest of us must learn to recognize. On a quiet evening in October 1938, families across America gathered around their radios for what they assumed would be just another night of entertainment. What they got instead was a broadcast that would become legend Orson Welles' Mercury Theatre adaptation of The War of the Worlds. The show began innocently enough with a weather report and dance music, but then the interruptions started. Fake news bulletins cut in, breathless announcers describing explosions on Mars, a meteorite striking New Jersey, and finally chillingly alien tripods marching across the countryside, vaporizing everything in their path. The performance was so convincing that thousands reportedly fled their homes in terror, convinced Earth was under attack. At least that's the story we've been told for decades. But here's the twist: the infamous mass panic wasn't nearly as widespread as history remembers, and the real hoax might be the myth itself. Contemporary newspaper accounts painted a picture of chaos, highways jammed with cars, phone lines overwhelmed by frantic calls, even scattered reports of heart attacks. Headlines screamed about nationwide hysteria, with the New York Times declaring the broadcast had terrorized the country. But later research revealed a far more nuanced reality. Surveys conducted shortly after the broadcast estimated only about 20% of listeners tuned in mid-program, missing Welles' clear introduction stating it was fiction. Even fewer took it seriously, likely no more than 1 million people out of the 6 million who heard it. Most who panicked lived in New Jersey, where the fictional invasion was set, and even there, reactions were scattered, not citywide. So why did the narrative of nationwide terror take hold? The answer lies in the media's own agenda. Newspapers, already locked in a bitter rivalry with the rising power of radio, seized the opportunity to discredit the medium. By exaggerating the panic, they could paint radio as irresponsible and dangerous, a threat to public order. The New York Daily News even ran a fabricated photo of a crowd fleeing, a building actually a stock image of a political rally. The irony is delicious. The very outlets condemning Welles' fictionalized news bulletins were crafting their own sensationalized headlines. The panic became a self-fulfilling prophecy, fueled less by actual fear than by newspapers desperate to regain cultural relevance. Welles himself was stunned by the backlash. At 23, he'd envisioned the broadcast as a creative experiment in realism, not a social catastrophe. When pressed by reporters, he quipped, "I didn't know we'd gone that far." The Federal Communications Commission briefly considered banning simulated news formats but ultimately took no action, realizing the hysteria had been overblown. In the end, the broadcast catapulted Welles to fame and inadvertently proved the power of media to shape perception, whether through fake Martian invasions or even faker panic. The legacy of the War of the Worlds isn't about gullible audiences. It's about how easily narratives can be distorted to serve an agenda. The real invasion wasn't from Mars. It was from an old guard of journalists fighting a losing battle against new media. And that's the true warning hidden in this story. Sometimes the most dangerous hoaxes aren't the ones that scare us in the moment, but the ones that rewrite history long after the fact. The next time you hear about a public frenzy, whether over a radio play or a viral tweet, ask yourself, who benefits from you believing the world is losing its mind? The War of the Worlds broadcast didn't just vanish into the ether. It left lasting scars on how we regulate and consume media. While the panic was exaggerated, the fallout was real, sparking urgent debates about the responsibilities of broadcasters. The Federal Communications Commission, still in its infancy at the time, faced its first major test: how to balance creative freedom with public trust. Though they stopped short of banning dramatized news, networks quickly adopted voluntary guidelines, clearly labeling fictional content to avoid confusion. CBS, for instance, mandated interruptions for disclaimers during similar programs, a practice that endures today in everything from true crime podcasts to docudramas. But the deeper impact was psychological. The broadcast planted seeds of skepticism that would grow into full-blown media literacy movements. Consider how the hoax redefined audience agency. Before 1938, radio was seen as an authoritative voice, as reliable as the morning newspaper. Wells' stunt shattered that illusion, proving even trusted platforms could be weaponized for fiction. Suddenly, listeners became acutely aware of media's persuasive power, questioning not just entertainment but all broadcasts. This awakening mirrored earlier reactions to yellow journalism, but with a crucial difference: radio reached into living rooms, making the betrayal feel personal. That shift from passive consumption to critical engagement laid groundwork for today's media literacy education, where dissecting sources is as fundamental as reading or writing. Yet the hoax's legacy cuts both ways. While it taught audiences to question what they hear, it also gave rise to a more insidious phenomenon: the weaponization of doubt. Politicians and corporations soon realized that sowing skepticism could be as powerful as spreading lies. By the 1950s, tobacco companies were borrowing from Wells' playbook, funding research to cast doubt on smoking's health risks, not by disproving the science, but by muddying the waters enough to confuse the public. The same tactics now fuel climate denial and anti-vaccine movements, proving that once skepticism is unleashed, it's hard to control. Perhaps most ironically, the broadcast's myth outlived its facts. The exaggerated panic narrative became a shorthand for media effects theory, cited in textbooks and documentaries as proof of mass suggestibility. But recent scholarship reveals a twist. Those who did panic weren't gullible rubes. They were often educated, urban listeners who missed the disclaimer and trusted the medium. Their reaction wasn't ignorance, it was too much faith in a system that hadn't yet earned healthy distrust. That nuance matters today as we grapple with deepfakes and AI-generated content. The lesson isn't that people are easily fooled, it's that trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to repair. So when you see a viral story that feels too perfect, remember Wells' unintended experiment. The real aliens weren't the Martians, they were the hidden vulnerabilities in our media ecosystem, waiting to be exposed. And while we've built better defenses, fact-checking algorithms, transparency laws, the core challenge remains. In a world where fiction can wear the face of news, the greatest power still lies with the audience. Not just to question what we hear, but to demand better from those who speak. In 1903, a bombshell text began circulating across Europe, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Purporting to be the secret minutes of a Jewish conspiracy to dominate the world, its pages dripped with sinister plots, controlling banks, orchestrating wars, manipulating governments. The document claimed to expose a cabal of Jewish leaders plotting global domination, and for millions of readers, it wasn't just persuasive, it was terrifyingly plausible. But beneath its veneer of authenticity lay a truth far more disturbing than fiction. The protocols were a monstrous fabrication, cobbled together by the Russian secret police to justify pogroms and divert attention from the crumbling Tsarist regime. The origins of the hoax are as audacious as they are vile, drawing from earlier anti-Semitic literature and even plagiarizing chunks of a French political satire that had nothing to do with Jews. The protocols were stitched together like a grotesque literary Frankenstein. The satire, Maurice Joly's dialogue in Hell between Machiavelli and Montesquieu, was a critique of Napoleon III's authoritarianism. Yet in the hands of Russian operatives, its fictional dialogue about power became proof of Jewish world domination. The document's creators banked on the fact that few would cross-reference obscure texts, and they were right. By the time the protocols reached print, their lies had taken on a life of their own. The consequences were catastrophic. In the wake of the Russian Revolution, White Army officers smuggled copies westward, where the protocols found eager audiences among Europe's rising fascist movements. Adolf Hitler cited them in Mein Kampf, calling them uncannily accurate, while Henry Ford funded mass printings in America, spreading the poison to millions. Even after the London Times exposed the hoax in 1921, revealing the plagiarized passages and Tsarist fingerprints, the damage was irreversible. The lie had already metastasized, fueling genocidal ideologies and providing a scholarly veneer for centuries-old hatred. What makes the protocols uniquely horrifying isn't just their falsity, but their durability. Unlike most hoaxes which crumble under scrutiny, this one thrived on it. Each debunking was dismissed as part of the cover-up, each exposed flaw twisted into proof of the conspiracy's cunning. Today, the protocols still circulate in the darkest corners of the internet, translated into dozens of languages, their lies repackaged for new generations. They've inspired terrorist manifestos, fueled Middle Eastern conflicts, and even appear in state-sponsored textbooks abroad. The real lesson of the protocols isn't about the power of lies, it's about the human capacity to need them. For bigots, the document wasn't just a text, it was permission. By dressing hatred in the guise of revelation, it turned ancient superstitions into modern fact. And that's the darkest truth of all. The most dangerous hoaxes aren't those that fool us, but those that tell us exactly what we already wanted to believe. Long after its forgers were forgotten, their creation kept killing, proving that some lies, once set loose, can never be fully undone. The protocols didn't just poison minds in the early 20th century, they became a blueprint for genocide. When Adolf Hitler rose to power in the 1930s, he weaponized the forged document with chilling precision. In Mein Kampf, he cited it as evidence of an international Jewish conspiracy, writing, "They disclose with an almost terrifying certainty the final aims of the Jewish people." His propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, distributed millions of copies across Nazi Germany, embedding the lie into school curricula and public lectures. The protocols gave pseudoscientific justification for the Holocaust, framing extermination as self-defense against a fictional threat. Even as death camps operated at full capacity, Nazi officials quoted passages to justify their atrocities, twisting the hoax into a murder manifesto. But the rot didn't stop with the Third Reich. Like a virus, the protocols mutated to infect new hosts. In the post-war Middle East, translated editions spread through state media and extremist literature, fueling anti-Semitic riots and policies. Egypt's state television aired a dramatic series based on the text in 2002, while Hamas and Hezbollah still reference it in charters accusing Jews of world domination. Modern white supremacists, from neo-Nazi forums to extremist manifestos, recycle its tropes, repackaging century-old lies for the digital age. The irony is grotesque. A Tsarist forgery designed to scapegoat Jews for Russia's problems now fuels ideologies its creators couldn't have imagined. Debunking efforts, though relentless, face an uphill battle. As early as 1921, the London Times exposed the plagiarism linking the protocols to Joly's satire. Swiss courts ruled it a fraud in 1935, and scholars have meticulously dismantled its claims for decades. Yet each exposure seems to feed the conspiracy's resilience. Deniers dismiss evidence as part of the cover-up, turning skepticism into further proof. When a 2021 UN report condemned the document's continued circulation, conspiracists claimed it was censorship, another layer of the Jews controlling media narrative. The real tragedy lies in what the protocols reveal about hatred's mechanics. It's not that people believe the lie, it's that they want to. The document offers a seductive simplicity, all the world's chaos explained by a single villain. From pandemic scapegoating to replacement theory, modern conspiracy theories follow the same playbook. They don't need facts, just a story that feels true to those primed to accept it. And that's why 100 years after its exposure, the protocols endure, not as history but as a warning. The most dangerous lies aren't those we mistake for truth, but those we choose to believe. London, 1795. A teenage bookseller named William Henry Ireland stood before the most respected scholars of his day, holding a treasure they'd spent lifetimes dreaming of, a lost play by William Shakespeare, complete with the bard's own signature. The literary world erupted. Here was Vortigern and Rowena, a tragedy supposedly penned by the greatest writer in history, hidden for centuries in an aristocrat's dusty trunk. Even Ireland's own father, a devout Shakespeare enthusiast, wept with joy at the discovery. There was just one problem. Every word of it was a fake, crafted by a 19-year-old with nothing but a quill, some old paper, and a devious streak of genius. Ireland's forgery began as a desperate bid for his father's approval. Samuel Ireland, a collector obsessed with Shakespeare, had long dismissed his son as unremarkable. So young William hatched an audacious plan. He'd manufacture the relics his father craved. Using blank parchment torn from antique books, he taught himself to mimic Elizabethan handwriting, even brewing ink from period-accurate ingredients to avoid chemical detection. His first discovery, a signed Shakespeare land deed, was so convincing it fooled his father instantly. Emboldened, Ireland escalated, producing love letters to Anne Hathaway, annotated books, and finally, the crown jewel, an entirely new Shakespeare play. The deception snowballed wildly. London's elite clamored to see the manuscripts, with famed actor John Philip Kemble securing Vortigern for a high-profile debut at the Drury Lane Theatre. Critics were split. Some hailed it as a masterpiece, while others noted jarring anachronisms and clumsy verse. But the real undoing came from Ireland's own ambition. When he found an even earlier play, Henry II, scholars finally revolted. Poet laureate Henry James Pye publicly denounced it as wretched, while editor Edmund Malone spent months dissecting every flaw in a 700-page exposé. The clincher, Ireland's Shakespeare, had misspelled words the real bard consistently got right. The aftermath was pure theatrical tragedy. Under interrogation, Ireland confessed, but the twist. His father refused to believe him, clinging to the lie even after his son admitted it. The public, meanwhile, turned fury into farce. Vortigern's lone performance devolved into a riot of laughter, with actors ad-libbing jokes about the script's absurdity. Yet for all the humiliation, Ireland's hoax left an indelible mark. It exposed how blindly we worship genius, how easily authentication crumbles before wishful thinking. Today, the forgeries sit in museums not as Shakespeare's work, but as a cautionary tale about the lengths we'll go to touch greatness, even if we have to invent it ourselves. Ireland's Shakespeare forgeries didn't just embarrass a few scholars, they sent shockwaves through the entire world of literary authentication. Before Vortigern and Rowena, the idea that someone could so thoroughly fabricate an entire play from a bygone era seemed almost unthinkable. But in the wake of Ireland's exposure, collectors and academics faced an uncomfortable truth. If a teenager with some old paper and determination could fool the brightest minds of London, how many other discoveries might be just as fraudulent? The scandal forced a reckoning, sparking a revolution in how historical manuscripts were verified. Suddenly, handwriting analysis wasn't enough. Scholars began cross-referencing every detail: paper composition, ink chemistry, even the linguistic quirks of the supposed era. Take the case of the infamous Shakespeare folios that surfaced in the early 19th century. Where earlier experts might have swooned at the sight of a signature, post-Ireland researchers dissected everything from verb conjugations to punctuation habits. The bard, they realized, had distinct stylistic tics, like his preference for music over music, that forgers often overlooked. These tiny discrepancies became the fingerprints of fraud, a forensic approach borrowed straight from the courts. But the real game changer was chemistry. By the Victorian era, scientists were using ultraviolet light and microscopic analysis to detect anachronistic inks or modern paper treatments. When a lost poem attributed to John Milton appeared in 1852, examiners quickly spotted telltale traces of chrome yellow pigment, a color that didn't exist in Milton's 17th century. The hoax was crushed in weeks, not decades. Even the most convincing forgeries, like those by master counterfeiter Thomas Wise, eventually crumbled under spectroscopic scrutiny, proving that science could succeed where human judgment failed. The legacy of Ireland's trickery lives on in today's digital age. Modern authentication combines AI-powered textual analysis with carbon dating and spectral imaging, leaving almost no room for a lone forger to slip through. Yet the irony is rich. The same tools that unmask frauds also deepen our appreciation for genuine artifacts. Every verified manuscript now carries the invisible stamp of having survived a gauntlet Ireland himself helped design. His greatest unintended gift, teaching us that the past isn't just something we discover, it's something we must tirelessly, meticulously defend. The summer of 1835 was scorching, but imaginations burned even hotter when the New York Sun began publishing astonishing dispatches from the moon. Day after day, readers devoured reports of bat-winged humanoids, sapphire temples, and herds of bison roaming lunar valleys, all supposedly observed through an advanced new telescope by famed astronomer Sir John Herschel. The series, written under the headline Great Astronomical Discoveries, sent New York into a frenzy. Papers sold out within hours, churches held prayer meetings to contemplate these celestial beings, and even scientists hesitated to dismiss the claims outright. How could so many fall for such an outlandish tale? Because the hoax preyed on two irresistible forces: public fascination with science and a newspaper war where truth was the first casualty. The Sun's editor, Richard Adams Locke, knew exactly what he was doing. He crafted the articles with just enough plausibility to hook intellectuals, name-dropping real astronomers, describing the telescope's optics in convincing detail, and citing the respected Edinburgh Journal of Science, a publication that conveniently had recently ceased printing. His fictional moon was a masterclass in world-building, blending Enlightenment ideals with pure fantasy. The Bat People, dubbed Vespertilio Homo, lived in harmony, suggesting a utopia that mirrored progressive dreams back on Earth. Even their architecture, gleaming pyramids and lush gardens, echoed popular theories that ancient civilizations might have lunar counterparts. What made the hoax unforgettable wasn't just its audacity, but its timing. The 1830s were a golden age of scientific discovery, with breakthroughs like the first photograph and the mapping of distant stars. Ordinary citizens hungered for wonder, yet few could access expensive telescopes or academic journals. The Sun bridged that gap, offering vicarious adventure cloaked in scholarly authority. Meanwhile, rival papers like the New York Herald were printing equally sensational stories. Some claiming mermaids had been found, so readers had no reason to doubt Locke's moon men. By the time experts like Herschel himself sent angry denials from South Africa, the Sun had already tripled its circulation and quietly admitted the ruse. The fallout was surprisingly mild. Instead of outrage, the public greeted the reveal with grudging admiration. The articles were reprinted as pamphlets, delighting audiences who appreciated the joke even as they'd been its mark. Scientists, though embarrassed, conceded the series had sparked genuine interest in astronomy, a bittersweet legacy for a deception born of profit. Today, the Great Moon Hoax stands as a testament to media's power to shape reality, proving that sometimes the line between news and fiction isn't just blurred, it's imaginary. The Great Moon Hoax didn't just sell newspapers, it birthed an entire genre of storytelling that still dominates media today. Richard Adams Locke's fabricated lunar discoveries set the template for what would soon be dubbed yellow journalism, where sensationalism trumped facts and entertainment value outweighed ethics. The New York Sun's success with fantastical headlines proved something dangerous. Truth wasn't nearly as profitable as spectacle. Within decades, papers across America were locked in a cutthroat race to the bottom, trading credibility for circulation numbers. And the tactics they pioneered, exaggeration, fabrication, and emotional manipulation, still echo in today's tabloids and clickbait headlines. Take the infamous rivalry between Joseph Pulitzer's New York World and William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal in the 1890s. These media titans didn't just report news, they manufactured it, whipping the public into frenzies over everything from staged interviews to outright lies. When the battleship USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor in 1898, Hearst's paper didn't wait for evidence. It ran the now legendary headline, "Destruction of the warship Maine was the work of an enemy." Never mind that the cause was likely an accidental coal bunker fire. The journal's dramatic illustrations and breathless prose convinced Americans that Spain had attacked, helping push the nation into the Spanish-American War. Hearst reportedly told his illustrator, "You furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war." It wasn't journalism, it was propaganda disguised as news. The DNA of these stunts lives on in modern tabloids, where blurring the line between fact and fiction is practically an art form. From alien baby photos to celebrity death hoaxes, the goal remains the same: hook readers with outrageous claims, then let retractions, if they come at all, hide in tiny print on page 26. Even mainstream outlets borrow from the playbook, framing political scandals or health scares with the same hyperbolic urgency that once sold moon men. The difference: today's algorithms amplify the chaos, rewarding engagement over accuracy. A study by MIT found that false stories on social media spread 6 times faster than true ones, proving that Locke's 19th century gamble wasn't an anomaly, but a preview of our post-truth age. Yet the most unsettling legacy of yellow journalism isn't the lies themselves, it's how they reshape public memory. Decades after the Maine incident, surveys showed many Americans still believed Spain had deliberately sunk the ship, demonstrating how fiction, once entrenched, becomes its own kind of fact. The same phenomenon fuels modern conspiracy theories, where debunked claims linger like ghosts, haunting discourse long after their falsity is exposed. The lesson isn't just about media literacy, it's about recognizing that every headline, every viral story, carries the fingerprints of a long tradition, one that began when a newspaper decided the truth was less exciting than the story it could invent. And in that sense, the moon hoax never really ended. It just learned to fly faster, farther, and with far more destructive consequences. Deep in the rainforests of the Philippines in 1971, a sensational discovery made global headlines. An isolated tribe called the Tassidae, untouched by modern civilization, was reportedly living exactly as humans had in the Stone Age. Journalists described them as gentle foragers who spoke a unique language, wore leaves for clothing, and used simple stone tools. National Geographic sent photographers, anthropologists rushed to study them, and even celebrities like Charles Lindbergh and Gina Lollobrigida visited, captivated by the idea of meeting living fossils. The Tassidae became an overnight symbol of innocence, a window into humanity's distant past. But by the 1980s, the dream unraveled in spectacular fashion, exposing one of the most elaborate anthropological hoaxes of the 20th century. The initial reports were extraordinary. The tribe was said to have had no contact with outsiders until loggers stumbled upon them in the dense Mindanao jungle. They allegedly had no words for war, violence, or even basic agricultural tools, subsisting entirely on wild yams and palm hearts. Their language, seemingly distinct from neighboring dialects, fascinated linguists. The Marcos government swiftly declared their habitat a protected reserve, banning further logging, a move that conveniently aligned with the regime's political agenda. But red flags emerged almost immediately. Skeptics noted how quickly the Tassidae adapted to cameras, how their primitive tools looked suspiciously like props, and why no archaeological evidence of their long-term habitation could be found. The truth finally exploded when Swiss journalist Oswald Eiten infiltrated the area in 1986. What he found was devastating. The Tassidae were actually impoverished members of local Manobo tribes, coerced into playing cavemen for the benefit of corrupt officials. Far from isolated, they lived in nearby villages, wore modern clothing, and farmed rice. Many confessed they'd been bribed with money, food, and promises of land to pose as primitives, trading dignity for survival under the watch of armed guards. The elaborate ruse had been orchestrated by Manuel Elizalde, a Marcos crony who used the tribe's fabricated innocence to secure millions in foreign conservation funding, much of which vanished into private pockets. What makes this hoax uniquely haunting isn't just the deception, but the layers of complicity it exposed. Western researchers, eager for a pristine anthropological subject, ignored glaring inconsistencies. The media, hungry for a feel-good story, turned the Tassidae into exotic curiosities rather than questioning their origins. Even after the fraud was exposed, some anthropologists clung to the myth, arguing the tribe's performance still held cultural value. The Marcos regime's collapse finally stripped away the pretense, but the damage lingered. The real Tassidae returned to poverty, now stigmatized as actors in a global sham. Beyond the scandal lies a darker lesson about exploitation. The Tassidae weren't just fooling outsiders, they were victims of a system that commodified their poverty. Their story mirrors countless indigenous groups worldwide, forced to perform exaggerated versions of their culture for tourists or researchers who prefer fantasy to reality. Modern parallels abound, from uncontacted tribe documentaries that stage encounters to spiritual retreats selling fabricated rituals. The Tassidae hoax reminds us that when we romanticize primitiveness, we're often not preserving heritage, we're erasing real people in favor of a myth we find more comforting. And that's the cruelest trick of all. The lies we tell about others say far more about ourselves. From fabricated fossils to phantom prophets, history's greatest hoaxes reveal something startling, not just about the liars who crafted them, but about us, the believers. Whether it was Piltdown Man's fabricated missing link or the Tassidae's staged Stone Age existence, these deceptions thrived because they told stories we were already primed to accept. The Cardiff Giant played on America's love of spectacle. The Protocols of the Zion fed ancient prejudices, and Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast exposed how easily panic can be manufactured. Each hoax, no matter how outlandish, tapped into our deepest desires, to uncover hidden truths, to witness the impossible, or simply to feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves. But here's the twist: the most successful hoaxes often wanted to be exposed. George Hull's giant wasn't just a prank, it was a middle finger to blind faith. The Cottingley Fairies, though debunked, let a war-weary world cling to magic a little longer. Even the Hitler Diaries, clumsy as they were, revealed how desperately we seek explanations for evil. These lies didn't just fool people, they held up a mirror to our collective psyche, showing us the stories we'll swallow whole when they align with what we want to believe. So what's the antidote? Healthy skepticism, not cynicism. Questioning doesn't mean rejecting every extraordinary claim, it means demanding extraordinary evidence. When you hear about a lost masterpiece or a miraculous discovery, channel Lorenzo Valla, who dissected the donation of Constantine with logic, or the scientists who finally debunked Piltdown Man with chemistry. The best defense against hoaxes isn't distrust, it's curiosity. Dig deeper, cross-reference sources, and remember, if something seems tailor-made to confirm your biases, it probably is. Now, over to you. Which of these audacious hoaxes left you stunned? Was it the Shakespeare forger who outwitted scholars, or the Alien Autopsy that had millions convinced? Drop your pick in the comments, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more deep dives into history's wildest twists. because the next time a headline feels too good to be true, you'll know exactly how to spot the strings behind the illusion.